365, talking about the 12-1 Philadelphia Eagles. Johnny Mac, yours truly, Jody McDonald, along with Marcus Hayes, who jumps into the fray from the Philadelphia Inquirer and also WIP. Marcus, here's why I want to start with you today. I want to borrow a word that my partner likes to use: unsustainable. Is there anything that the Philadelphia Eagles are doing right now that you think is unsustainable? It can't be as good as we're seeing with our own two eyes. At some point, it has to level off. Is there any aspect of their game that you would put into that category?
Well, I assume this is a devil's advocate question. I guess the only issue would be if they come up against a defense that can cover for more than 4 or 5 seconds, because that's how good their offensive line is. If they come up against that defense, it can make the offense less potent, which then brings the other team's running game into play. And I know we're going to make a lot about what Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley didn't do the last 2 weeks, but Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley were taken out of the game pretty early. So there may be an erosive issue between the two older defensive tackles and Jordan Davis, who, isn't quite right and isn't expected to be quite right coming off that injury. So it's a long answer, but the answer, I think, is if they come up against a really good secondary that can cover long enough to cause problems for Jalen Hurts, keeps the game tight, and allows their good running game to present itself against older defensive tackles who, I just don't know how good Sue and Joseph are going to be in January, So all that said, unlikely, it all seems very sustainable, but that's a formula that could maybe bite them, especially in the playoffs.
Yeah, and we saw that in kind of the Washington game, Marcus, which is the only blemish on this team's record this season. They didn't really run the football that effectively, but they moved the chains. They were able to convert on third downs. I think it was kind of a perfect storm. The Eagles used too much tempo on offense, which is typically good for them. But when it bails, you get into sort of a Chip Kelly mode where the defense is right back on the field and you have this massive gap in time of possession. But boy, that's a small path. Washington, on one day in November, was able to navigate that path. But I don't like many teams' odds of navigating similar paths. Everything's about margin of error in this league. The Eagles' margin of error is pretty big right now. You think that's fair to say?
Well, I mean, clearly the most determinant factor in any football team, any football season, is turnover margin. Their quarterback has 3 interceptions.
Yeah.
That's insane. We're in week 13.
It's Aaron Rodgers territory.
Yeah. And this guy isn't Aaron Rodgers. Let's not be, he throws bad passes every once in a while, but he very seldom puts the football in harm's way. But he very seldom puts the football in harm's way because he's very seldom pressured. He's very seldom touched. And he can make the decisions on his end in the backfield to force a ball. Like the pass he threw to Devonta Smith yesterday, the short out that got a first down, Devonta wasn't open. And that's a tough throw. Other guys were open, but he was able to force that. I said that to say that's a very uncharacteristic ball for him to throw. He locked on Devonta and threw a tough pass, and they got the first down. That's the kind of decision you don't see him make often. It wasn't a bad decision. It was a good throw. And that throw in particular was it was thrown in a place where only Devonta could catch it. It could have been defended, but only Devonta could catch it. But even that, when that happens, your eyes pop open because you're used to seeing him hit guys who were utterly wide open, usually, if it's more than 6 or 7 yards down the field, after he's, patted the ball a couple of times. I mean, you just can't overstate, and it all starts here for this entire team, offense, defense, special teams, coaching, whatever. That offensive line is one of the best I've ever seen. It's just it's ridiculously good, to the degree that there's a column to be written about, is it Jalen or is it the offensive line? And Ryan Tannehill would be this guy. Or what would Daniel Jones look like with an offensive line like this? It's a fair question. It's not his fault. It's not Jalen's fault. And it's perfect for him and this his evolution because he still needs to evolve. But every time we talk about sustainability, it's sustainable as long as Jordan Mailata, Lane Johnson, and Jason Kelsey are healthy.
And the other guy who's kind of flying under the radar, and he absolutely benefits from the phenomenal offensive line you just related to, Marcus, is Miles Sanders. Yeah, we like to talk about Jalen Hurts and making plays with his legs and his now 108.5 passer rating, which is the best in the National Football League. But oh, by the way, Miles Sanders, over 1,000 yards, first in Shady McCoy, 144 yards yesterday, career high. And he is just like part of the mix. Other teams have that kind of rushing day from a guy like Miles Sanders, and they're talking about getting him a 5-year contract extension. With the Eagles, it's, well, we'll see at the end of the year. If he comes back on a hometown discount, yeah, we'll keep Miles around. How underrated a season is Miles Sanders having?
It's an interesting term. I mean, again, I think, like you said, he's overshadowed by everything else, by A.J. Brown, who's a huge difference maker for everybody, by the offensive line, which makes it all happen, and by Jalen Hurts being proficient. You know, he's an efficient quarterback. But Miles Sanders, my greatest criticism of Nick Sirianni and Shane Steichen last year was that they didn't understand what they had in Miles Sanders. Miles Sanders is shady light. You know, he's a threat every time, and that's why that's why they drafted him. You know, they wanted a running back who could score from the line of scrimmage every time to give those safeties pause to make play action relevant. And they don't use a lot of play action. And that's another criticism I have of them. They don't do a lot of stuff from under center. But Miles Sanders is having the kind of year that if you're Miles Sanders entering free agency, the kind of year you certainly want to have. And, you know, he told me, he told me 8 weeks ago, I want to stay here. You know, He says, I want to be here. He wants to win. He's having fun. He knows that he will continue to be productive with this offensive line. He knows that he will continue to be productive in this system now that they've understood what they have. And he's probably got 3 or 4 really, really elite years left, in part because he wasn't used a whole lot or as much as I think he should have been last season.
Yeah. What's crazy with Miles is, you know, he's having this season, Jody gave you the numbers, also throw double-digit touchdowns after coming off a season where he had 0.
At a goose egg.
Which was crazy. But still, Marcus, I look at Miles and I look at this offense, and I'm with you. I can't get to Miles until I get to AJ and Devonta and the offensive line and the quarterback and Dallas Goedert when he's healthy. It's crazy to have somebody with the explosive ability of Miles Sanders, and he's almost an afterthought on this offense. The first 2 drives, 14 plays, 84 yards, 12 plays, 91 yards. That is astounding efficiency. You got to convert on 3rd down. They converted on the 4th down play with the big touchdown. And they've done this throughout the season. They've had these long, sustained drives, Marcus, in an era where everybody wants you to have long drives because they think you're going to make a mistake. In other words, everybody plays this Fangio-style defense, keep everything in front, no explosive plays, because ultimately, if you have to go 14 plays, if you have to go 12 plays, you're going to get a mistake. There's going to be a false start. There's going to be a tackle for loss. There's going to be a sack, and it's going to blow up the entire drive. Have you ever seen anything like the ability to sustain these long drives in the modern era, not in this particular era?
Yeah, San Francisco did it when they went to the Super Bowl with that great running game. And excuse me, they did it with the Kaepernick Super Bowl team. You know, they've done it a couple of times. And the funny thing about that is I saw a stat that, you know, you think of San Francisco, you think of, okay, they have these sort of second-tier quarterbacks in great running and defense.
Yeah.
I think they have 4 quarterbacks in the last like 12 years, 14 years, who average or who are in the top 20 among average yards per attempt, which is probably the key indicator of efficient offense. So that doesn't mean they're throwing bombs. That means the yards when they do throw, not average yards per game, average attempts per game, but average yards per attempt.
Right.
They get their money's worth when they put the ball in the air, and it doesn't matter if it's Garoppolo or whoever. They've gotten their money's worth. So that said, there have been some teams that have been able to sustain drives, but they do it by understanding what's going to happen on every play, and that's really been the genius of Jalen Hurts. He understands what's going to happen. And we talk to Nick Sirianni a lot, John. And every time we say, where has Jalen taken the biggest jump, it's recognition. It's understanding what's in front of him and understanding what's probably going to happen in succession in every play. And that's really remarkable. You know, you can talk about him being a coach's kid and studying and all that sort of stuff. This is something we didn't see from a coach's kid who'd been with 2 elite college programs and had, a year in this system with good coaching. All that said, I mean, this works again. It comes back again to the offensive line. They don't false start and they never hold. That's the key. Holding calls are the number one reason why drives.
They did against Tennessee. They had how many did they have against Tennessee, Jerry?
They had
in
the offensive line had like 11 penalties.
Yeah,
right.
The offensive line,
and that's what I mean. In the Tennessee game, Marcus, they did have those penalties, and they were able to. Usually, that's kind of my point. I'm glad you brought that up. Usually, when that happens, all right, drive's over, right? For most teams,
right?
With the Eagles and Jalen Hurts this year, he's like, all right, we got 5 extra yards, we got 10 extra yards. I'm just going to throw the football down the field. That was against Tennessee, but it's pretty amazing to see this team's ability. And he got 7 or 8 receivers involved in those first 2 drives. And Dallas Goedert isn't here. I was concerned about Jack Stoll and Grant Calcaterra. The Eagles are game planning now for Grant Calcaterra early. It's pretty amazing. And you're right about the offensive line. A.J. Brown is another name you brought up. He's the final domino. I mean, A.J. is a superstar. I think we can all look at players and say they have flaws, and A.J. has flaws. He's a human being, but everybody has weaknesses. A.J. Brown, you put him in any offense in the NFL with any quarterback, and you saw it in Tennessee with Ryan Tannehill. It's not exactly, Joe Burrow or Justin Herbert throwing for all these yards. He's going to be effective. It is, his impact on the Eagles offense. Talk about that.
Well, you call him the final domino. I would contend that, so that implies that he kind of gets them over the top. I would say he's probably more important than certainly Devonta Smith, certainly Dallas Goedert, which is a surprise. I thought Dallas would be more important than AJ, but he also might be more important than Jalen Hurts, less replaceable, because there are only so many AJ Browns willing and able to do what AJ Brown does all the time. He completes his route. He blocks on the run. He is a spectacular leader. He's in unbelievable shape. He played hurt for a month and didn't complain about it, and played effectively hurt for a month. And he's a leader in the locker room. So all that said, he might be the least replaceable guy. I mean, everybody, it's kind of like when T.O. came in 2004, people were like, well, he's the final piece. No, he's a centerpiece. He's not the finishing touch. He's a centerpiece. And, I didn't know this about AJ Brown. I don't know if you guys did. I didn't know that he was this good, and maybe he wasn't. Maybe he got better. He's a 5th-year player, 6th-year player,
fourth year,
fourth-year player. He's supposed to get better. Jeffrey Lurie says NFL players are what they will be by their 4th year. So it's been a revelation. It's been pleasant too. And honestly, John, I think AJ Brown's surprising AJ Brown. I don't think AJ Brown realized he was this good.
I Jody and I talked about it. And remember, Jody, I said he was top 10 receiver. I didn't know he was this good.
Yeah,
I didn't know he was this good. I knew he was good. But yeah, maybe there's improvement on top of being that great player.
He's so good, he got his GM fired.
That's true.
That's true.
Before the season started, I think I had him 11th, and it ticked off Eagle fans because I said he's just outside the top 10.
We ticked off a bunch of people.
Time to reevaluate. He is certainly in the top 10 with the season he's having this year.
You know,
No
you
question.
should put it in ESPN's evaluator.
Yeah, the football power indicator.
He would be 37th.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. All right, Marcus, you're going to be the first one to have to deal with this because John and I are for the next 5 days, and then the week thereafter, it's going to both annoy and excite Eagle fans. I'm going to go on record and say I think the Eagles win their next 2 games. They beat the Cowboys. They beat the Bears in Chicago this week, and then they beat the Cowboys on Christmas Eve, which is going to lock up everything for them. But it's also going to put a very important decision at the feet of the organization, not just the coaching staff, the organization. Because if they win their next 2 games, they will have locked up everything. Then what do? You still got 2 regular season games to play. Saints at home, Giants at home. We've seen this Eagle team, basically since Nick Sirianni showed up, put a heavy emphasis on less is more. That if we don't put our players at risk, they're going to stay more healthy, and we're prioritizing that over extra work or harder work. And how can you question the results? They're 12-1. They're the best team in the National Football League. But if they have the last 2 weeks of the regular season with meaningless games and then a bye week on top of it because they're the number 1 seed, can you go 3 weeks without keeping your star players fresh and in a continued mode of playing every 7 days? How the Eagles going to handle it if I'm right and they win the next 2 weeks?
Well, it goes back to when they had their bye. They had their bye early, right? Like week 7, week 8, something like that. So what I would do, and it seems pretty simple, is say you're in with Dallas and you have, I think it goes New Orleans Giants. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. You rest them against New Orleans, you play them against the Giants, and then you get the bye week. So then you effectively have 3 byes. They're going to need time off after Dallas. Dallas is going to be a tough game, win, lose, or draw. Assuming they win it and nothing matters, then a bye week that week is hugely beneficial, especially to Lane Johnson, Jason Kelsey, Fletcher Cox, Javon Curse, Ndamukong Suh, Linval Joseph, Javon Hargrave, Darius Slay. That's 8 frontline guys 30 or over playing a 17-game season. They'll have played 15 games at the end of this season if they get 3 bye weeks. So all that said, to me, it's a pretty simple equation. Assuming you're in a position where New Orleans and or the Giants don't matter, you rest them against New Orleans, you play them against the Giants, so you go big game, bye-ish, essentially a bye, warm-up game, and you play them 3.5 quarters, doesn't matter what the outcome is against the Giants in the finale, bye, and then you're back at it.
Marcus, you alluded to it and you wrote about it, so I want to bring it up at Inquirer.com. Coming into this week, ESPN, whatever, their football power index, whatever it's called, significantly graded Dallas over Philadelphia. I'll be interested to see how it shakes out this week. But
it's up.
Oh, is it up?
Yeah.
Dallas still ahead.
And guess what?
Yeah.
Dallas is still ahead.
Yeah.
Despite almost losing to a team at home that the Eagles beat.
The Eagles took a lot of hits.
By 12.
The Eagles took a lot of hits that week. They didn't play well. Certainly wasn't their best game, but they didn't have that kind of trouble with Houston.
And it was a short week on the road.
Short week on the road.
I mean,
big road trip. Typically, you don't see that on Thursday night games. That kind of road trip.
It's insane.
Why do people get so upset about this? You talked to Brandon Graham. Brandon Graham said, "F them. Who cares?" The Eagles are the best team in football. Who cares if your analytics say the Cowboys are the best team in football? Maybe throw away the analytics and tweak the algorithm.
Well, the algorithm also presents the Chiefs, and I think the Chiefs the Chiefs and Bills were ranked ahead of the Eagles, and now I think the Bills are just behind them. So all that said, the algorithm isn't trash. You know, we have to acknowledge the value of data, but there has to be something in this formula that's flawed, because it's beyond belief that a team that you beat, a team that the fact that you beat a team in Minnesota that has a better record than Dallas, the fact that you have another common opponent that you handled easily on the road on a short week that they struggled with yesterday. If you think that those factors don't point toward the Eagles being a better team and a more likely team to win in the playoffs, and here's one of the anomalies, and it took me a couple of minutes to figure this out. They now have Dallas as the second favorite to reach the Super Bowl behind the Eagles, but the favorite to win it, which tells me they think the Eagles can beat the Cowboys more readily than they think the Eagles can beat the AFC representative, but they think the Cowboys can more readily beat the AFC representative than the Eagles can. So there is a logical path to that, as nonsensical as it seems. But it took me, it took me like 4 minutes to figure out how that could make sense.
Not sure how something can be illogical and nonsensical at the same time, but that's just me. And, oh, by the way, if the Eagles beat the Cowboys in 13 days, whatever it is, and they still have the Cowboys as number one, we'll know somebody's got their thumb on the scale, okay?
That's right.
It's just not adding up to me. I understand the importance of data, but sometimes data just comes out wrong. All right, Marcus, with the fact that they've got the Bears coming up this week, had some injuries coming out of yesterday's game. Again, the Eagles been very protective of their players and have done a good job. They, like everyone in the NFL, has injuries. It's a collision sport. You're going to have injuries. You can't just completely wipe them off the face of the earth. Again, this week, they built themselves some wiggle room with the other teams in the NFL. Did they go gingerly in Chicago? You gave us a great breakdown of potential what could happen once they lock everything up. When they lock everything up, they handled this week's game against Chicago, a team that they should be able to handle pretty damn easily. Do they handle it any differently because they've got the big picture view?
The person who has probably the biggest impact on the Eagles winning and losing over the last 8 years has been Lane Johnson. Lane Johnson strained an oblique yesterday. I think it's on his left side. And he said that he could have stayed in if it was like a playoff game or whatever. But these things, you know, anybody who never covers baseball knows that obliques take 3 or 4 weeks to get right. So the calculus becomes, is the drop off from Lane Johnson to Jack Driscoll significant enough to put the team in peril of losing that game? Jack Driscoll played well yesterday in relief of Lane Johnson, and Jack Driscoll has been a spectacular backup, and they can help him. They're probably going to get Dallas Goedert back, if not this week, next week. So to answer your question, the injury, the situation for me that's most remarkable is, okay, is Lane Johnson going to play? I would be surprised if they play him. They do err on the side of caution. They've got 12 wins. They probably need one more to, you know, really put them in a position where they can they have that home field advantage. So yeah, I mean, if you think that 13 gets you the number 1 seed, then yeah, because you don't want him to aggravate this and have it in January. Yeah. So I can see them shutting him down into January. You know, maybe he doesn't play against Dallas either, and maybe that's a bigger deal. But yeah, the only thing, you know, I know the punter got hurt. Excuse me. And, you know, I don't have anything against him, but he's not a very good punter, you know, and you could replace punters.
Might be a better runner than a punter.
he was pretty good runner. And if he had been more attentive to the sideline, they would have retained the ball. But yeah, I think that might be the one sort of concession that they give this week. Otherwise, they're going full bore. And I think they want to make, I think they're in the business of making statements now. Because why are you throwing that pass to Devonta Smith down the sideline? A pass that should have been intercepted.
Could have been.
That on 4th and 7. That's a bad call. They got away with it. But they got away with it and sent a message to the league that, hey, you never know what we're going to do.
Yeah. With the Chicago game, Marcus, we've been around this team for a long time. There are, I like to call them logical losses. If there was ever a week to have a lull, this is the week. You come off a big NFC East win. Chicago's not relevant. They're not in the playoff picture. And you have Dallas on Christmas Eve, and that's the game against the number one team in the football power, or whatever they are, who's ever number one. But that's the game, right? This is logical to have a letdown. That's the most impressive part of it. They don't have letdowns. I'm always looking for. I had that Tennessee game. I said, Jody will tell you, I bought into it. I said, they're not going to care about this game. AFC Bo. Everybody talks about Mike Vrabel's team being so tough and physical. They just bulldozed them. No lull whatsoever. No looking past. Do you see that ability from this team? Even Dallas talking about playing Houston. Obviously, they didn't bring their A game. It's happened once to the Eagles in Washington. But this is the rare team I'm not concerned about having that letdown game. Is that something you see as well?
They just have I go around every position, really like every single player. They play offended. They play angry. Like Brandon Graham isn't happy that he's being, sort of marginalized. So he plays every snap angry. Josh Sweat has a huge chip on his shoulder because he got so much grief from getting a contract for having really done nothing to earn it, but he's earning it now. Darius Slay is the most aggrieved superstar I've ever seen. James Bradbury's playing for a contract. Miles Sanders is playing for a contract. You go down the line, Jason Kelsey is showing people he still belongs. Fletcher Cox playing for a contract. It's just every single position, like every single nobody has any security. Jalen Hurts is playing for a massive contract. So they understand that the way you win, the way that you eat, the way that you get paid in the NFL especially, which is funny because it's so dependent on everybody else, more so than maybe any other sport, is you win. General managers and owners believe that there is a magic winning elixir, and if you've drank from that elixir, you become contagious. So everybody's playing with a chip and for a reason, and they're coaching that way. We see very, very innovative, energetic coaching, and you didn't see that at the end of the Andy Reid era, and you didn't see that at the end of Doug Peterson's tenure as well. These coaches are still invested and involved, and two of them are probably going to be head coaches next year, Shane Steichen and Jonathan Gannon.
The energy coach yesterday was Nick Sirianni when they completed that down the sidelines pass that you said was a bad call. They kind of worked out. I think the coach was a little excited on that one, and he should have been.
I think he was really worried until the ball nestled in Devonta Smith's arms. He was like, I'm going to get roasted for this. I'm going to get roasted for this. Hey, touchdown. Touchdown.
Marcus, no, you got to run. Thank you very much for hanging a couple extra minutes with us today. Great stuff. We'll get you back on again soon enough. Thanks, buddy.
Thank you for having me. Have a good day, John.
Thanks, Marcus. Appreciate it.
From the Philadelphia Inquirer and WIP here with us on Birds 360.
By the way, I got a lot of blowback for that Devonta Smith play. Like a lot of people saying, number one, Jalen checked to that call, so it wouldn't have been on the coaching staff, but the coaching staff was thrilled. But here's where I got a lot of people. Julian Love was in a position to make a play on the ball, but Jalen threw it right in the bucket. People are saying, well, he'd get blown up. And again, it's that man. He would get blown up in 1985. Devonta Smith probably wouldn't even be playing in 1985 because that type of body. But that's not how they play today.
Right.
You're not allowed to get
so.
You're not allowed to take shots at the receiver down the field. The Eagles know that. Take advantage of it, and it works. I don't know.
You watched the Sunday night game last night?
I did not.
You did not.
16
the Chargers just stone cold dominated the Dolphins. You talk about a score that didn't indicate the actual play of the game. Chargers went up and down the field against the Dolphins. Dolphins couldn't do squat. The Dolphins made 2 big plays. Tyreek Hill picked up a fumble that came out of a scrum. It just kind of popped out to the side. He picks it up and runs past everybody 75 yards for a touchdown. And he had one pass where the defensive back made the wrong read, turned the wrong way. Boom, he's in for 80-yard touchdown, whatever it was. That's it. Otherwise, the Dolphins offense stunk. They did nothing all night. Herbert was phenomenal. He was running out of the pocket, making plays on the run. He was just phenomenal. There was a roughing the passer call on Jalen Phillips on that play in last night's game. He tackled him. He put his hands down on the ground so as not to fall on him, and his chest actually touched his shoulder, and they threw the flag for roughing the passer because he put his body weight on him. No, you saw the video. He worked hard not to put his body weight on him, and they still threw the flag. It's a different game, folks. You got to stop comparing this game to 1995. It just isn't called that way anymore. It is played differently. It's called differently. You just have to analyze what's happening in 22 against everything else that's happening in 2022. All right. One thing Marcus Hayes brought up that I want to put to you, John McClain, because Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk, raised this over the weekend in his column about Jalen Hurts and a contract extension, which we know that they can't do right now, but they could do it in 4 weeks if they wanted to. I want to get your take on this when we come back. He's John McMullen. I'm Jody McDonald. We are Mac and Mac here on Birds 365. Stay